this meeting to order. It's Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. This is a regular meeting of the Catalina Foothill School District Governing Board. However, we are beginning early this evening to commence with a study session on school finance. And we welcome to our meeting our colleague and subject expert, Dr. Mary Cammerzell. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, I'm sure.
We'll go ahead and get started with our study session. Then we'll probably have a brief break before we commence the regular meeting at 6:30. And just like our regular meeting, at this time we have attendees from the public who are here in person and also those who may be joining us online. So welcome to everyone who is with us at this time. Thank you, Dr. Cammerzell. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready. Well, this is a highly summarized review of Arizona school finance. It's been described as a complex system that is often, it's often described as deeply flawed and unfair. I agree. I've tried to stay out of the weeds as much as possible and concentrate on the parts of the system that influence budget planning by the administration and the governing board. So hopefully it's relevant to the work that you are going to be doing very soon now in planning a budget for next year. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. The only thing that I ask, if you can manage it, is jot down a question, jot down your comments, whatever, on the sheet that you have, and I will try to pause after every slide, and that would be a great time then to hear what you have to say. But if it doesn't work out perfectly, I can handle that too. So we're going to start out with a brief history of school funding, and the focus of this presentation is on public school districts like CFSD. So, I'm not going to get into anything else like public school system that finance that governs charters, for example. So moving on, here is a history highlight of Arizona school finance, and I'll take the top three above the timeline together, and likewise the three at the bottom. 3 items on the top were significant changes in law affecting the maintenance and operation budget of schools. Before 1980, which you noticed is the first cell, school districts relied almost entirely on a local tax base to fund the schools. There have always been grants, federal and other, but as far as the preponderance of funding for a school district, taxpayers foot the bill pre-1980. 1980-81 is when we established what is called the equalization formula, and I'm going to get into that in a few minutes to show you hypothetically what that looks like, how that translates to a school district that receives equalization aid. Just to mention, for 1995, that's when charters were authorized by the legislature, and they were touted as a new public education option in our state. And of course, we've been off and running big time since then. We are the kingpin state for charters. You know about Prop 123, I believe, and it was authorized in an election in 2016. It has a life of 10 years. What happened was they increased the state trust land revenue distribution to offset some of the lack of inflation money that came to schools during the recession. So it took a decade to get to this place where the state really did address adding funds back to schools, but tapped a larger percentage of the state trust land revenues. I've forgotten exactly, I think maybe 6.7% is where it's at now. And you probably know that Governor Hobbs is recommending in her budget to renew or to extend Proposition 123, and I believe she wants to bump it up even further as far as the percentage distribution from the state trust land. The 3 at the bottom of the timeline have all to do with capital funding and our many decades of dissatisfaction in this state with how facilities and equipment are funded. In 1994, the Supreme Court ruled that the way the formula was devised to pay for capital or for the state's contribution to capital was unconstitutional. So it took 4 years until 1998 when a new capital system, financing system was devised. It was called Students First, Fair and Immediate Resources for Students Today. I remember this well. Throughout the state, scores of architects, engineers, construction companies were hired to scour the state, to go to all schools, analyze the facility, design what became deficiency correction projects. That's what they called them. And we had them in our district as well. One little interesting tidbit, as a side note, the signs that the foundation uses now in front of our campuses, those are the signs that the state put in front of the campus to tout deficiency correction program and listed the amount of money and what was going to be done to upgrade that school. So when we were all done with those correction projects, deficiency correction projects, the foundation asked if they could recycle those signs. So they've been used for a lot of years since then. Okay, we're still in the mode of taking the state on as far as capital funding. So in 2017, and the board members who are here, who've been here for a while, are familiar with this because at every law conference, ASBA conference, we had updates from the attorneys who were suing for the Arizona School Boards Association and some representative schools, the state. They claimed that the funding model violates the Constitution by putting low-income schools at a disadvantage. And this is an argument based on if you can't, in a school district, pass bonds or a capital override, then you don't have those resources that other school districts who can do that have. And that disparity is unacceptable, obviously, to the plaintiffs. The trial took place last summer. That's how long it took. And the judge said the ruling for that lawsuit would come sometime early this year. So we still don't know what the decision is for that lawsuit. Soon, hopefully. So you'll just speak up if you have something to say, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Mary.
Sure.
Sorry. Started off right. The Prop 123, I remember when it was being contemplated and it was a ballot initiative, if I recall. It had to be voted on. And there were all kinds of dire predictions about what would happen to the state trust if we increased the amount of money that was coming out of the state trust to fund schools. Have those dire predictions come true? Is the trust healthy enough to continue this?
The trust is very healthy. It's grown, at a rate that really, the naysayers back then predicted it wouldn't. So no, it's not an issue. I don't know what the legislative position will be on this.
Right.
But it would be unfortunate, of course, for any revenue stream that schools rely on now, goes away.
Well, it's $300 million, is it not?
Yeah, which is why she's, proposing an increase to it.
Sure, but if it doesn't get renewed via Prop 1, if it doesn't get funded by the trust, isn't it required that the general fund has to come up with those dollars?
I don't know that.
They're indicating, yes, that they're going to backfill with general fund dollars.
And I had read somewhere, and it was something, a nuance I wasn't aware of, that it's actually required that the general fund pick this up.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that either. I was wondering.
But maybe.
Yeah.
So
That's the message we've received is that we will get those funds.
Okay, so it won't drop off no matter what.
It'll
The
just be a
state
matter of
has-
what else gets cut.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
because it's funds from the general budget that will have to go.
Right.
Where's that versus something else?
yeah, Prop 123 provided $3.5 billion over the
Oh, it's
last
billion, not
10
million. 300
billion
billion, yeah.
over the last 10
Sorry,
years.
that's a big mistake on that.
And the election was in May of 2016. So back then, when doing the budget planning, we had two scenarios. That happens periodically.
I remember.
Because we wait to find out, and we don't know at the time of budget planning whether dollars are coming in from that source.
Or not.
But
The
Mary,
special election.
it sounds like it is the case that it can be extended by the legislature. It does not have to go back to the voters to be
Has to
extended.
go to vote.
Oh, it does have to go to the vote.
Yeah, it has to be an election.
Okay.
So the
What-
question
so I don't
is,
understand
The
the
legislature
backfill.
has to refer it to the
it has to be a
ballot.
referendum. It is a referendum now, and it would have to be again, I think.
And that would be,
In
Maybe
hopefully May.
November of 2025,
May,
perhaps.
August, or
oh,
November.
because it could be a special election in May.
Yeah,
Like
at our
August or
meeting,
November.
they indicated that they would have liked to have done it in May, but they've missed that.
It missed May.
Okay.
It would be either be August or November.
So that'll be, well, if the money has to come out of the general fund, we should still be able to do one budget
For this year.
for this year, yeah.
For next year, you mean, 26?
Yeah, for this coming
Our
year, yeah.
upcoming budget.
Right. Arizona Revised Statute Title 15 is the place in our laws that governs all public education. So, including finance, which is why I've highlighted those 3 chapters. And don't ask me why we don't have a chapter 6 or a chapter 17. I have 16, 17, I have no idea, and I couldn't find it. But anyway, it's not just K-12. It also governs community colleges and universities. And it gets updated periodically, obviously, as new laws come into being. And you'll notice Chapter 19 is all about empowerment scholarship accounts. So to the equalization formula, which originated in 1980-81, it is intended to allow school districts to have a similar effort when raising dollars for their students. So if you live on a grassy knoll, so to speak, the local tax base is going to pick up more of the funds. In other words, if the assessed valuation of property in the district, and we're an example, is healthy, then the local tax base is going to pick up more than what the state might add. I think people have the misconception that because the state dictates what the budget limit will be for schools, that they also pay for the funding for a budget, and that is not true. So if it's a low assessed, kind of in a dry gulch, place where there's a low assessment on property, then the state picks up a larger portion and gets that school district to the revenue base that it needs for its budget. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical example. Let's assume there are 2 school districts paying the same tax rate. We'll call one of them property rich. We'll call the other one property poor, just for the sake of conversation. The property rich district generates 60% of its budget in the local tax base, from the local tax base, and the state kicks in the other 40%. Property poor, 30%, local tax base, 70% the state. So here is how it might look more specifically. Let's assume that both districts need to generate a budget amount of $5 million. So I'm looking at the column for property rich. Their assessed property value is $100 million. You take the assessed value, divide it by 100 times the tax rate. So obviously, it's $1 million, basically 1%, times that $1 million times the $3 tax rate, which generates that $3 million, which is 60% of the budget, and the state picks up the difference, or $2 million, or 40%. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Okay. Property poor, column on the right, need that same $5 million for their budget, but their property valuation is half of what the property rich districts is, 50 million. So take that times 100, 500,000, times the $3 tax rate, it will generate $1.5 million. And that is 30% of the budget. The state will pick up the difference, which is 70% or $3.5 million. So we use it, I'll get into assessed value a little bit later, but we use assessed value, not full cash value of a property when we calculate taxes.
Are there school districts that leave money behind in the general fund?
There are school districts that never get equalization aid, is that what you mean?
Right, that's really what I mean, they're not getting any
Not very
contribution
many,
from
not very many.
the
We
state?
get equalization.
I know we get them, we're
I've
probably,
heard-
I don't know what our percentage is, I don't know that we're at that 60-40 level.
No, I don't think so.
I think our local contribution is higher than that.
Well, I'm not sure, because it's always on the calculated tax rate sheet that
Right.
comes from the county, and frankly, I didn't look for this year, so I'm sorry, but we do, it's always noted.
Right.
And it fluctuates as far as how much. I know there's one school district that has never received equalization aid up in Maricopa.
Meaning all their dollars come from.
From locally.
Yeah, 100% from their tax base, and I've forgotten Saddle Mountain, does that sound possible? Saddle Mountain, I'm-
Obviously, property rich with very few students.
yeah,
It's probably when that
That's
happens.
how it
It's
works.
way out on the east
Yeah, yeah, okay.
side west.
So this is what our net assessed valuation is this year. So for the current year, it's a little bit over 750 million. And our tax rate, which is the combined rate, primary and secondary tax rate, which pays for both M&O and capital, bonds, et cetera, is $4.75. And we now know, because it comes out in January, what our assessed valuation is that will be used for next year's budget. And it's grown by 4.5%. It's now $784,562,000. So 4.5% increase year over year. So does that mean the tax rate will go down? Perhaps. There are other factors that influence the tax rate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a taxpayer is going to pay fewer dollars to District 16. It depends entirely on what happens to their net assessed valuation of property. So conceivably, if someone has no assessment change, it's constant, static from what it was this year, they might realize a reduction in their obligation of dollars to District 16 through the tax. But there's a significant increase in assessed valuation, so I would say most people will be paying, even if the tax rate goes down, probably paying a few more dollars to the district. I mentioned that the state budget limit is set by the state. There are only 3 options to exceed it. And they're all local options, and they all require voter approval, so elections. And those 3 are bonds, a capital override, and a maintenance and operations override, and we have all 3 in place. We have had a maintenance and operations override in place since 1984, 40 years. The capital override has been in place, and it gets renewed. It's not like it has a life of 40 and you don't have to go back to the voters. And the capital override has been in place since 2008. Bonds fluctuate as far, we usually go out for bonds every 7 years or so, approximately. It always is based on need.
So 2028 will likely be the next time we go?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to talk about that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I'm spoiling.
No, you're not. You're right on. This is the transition. Our most recent election was November 8th, 2022, so 2 years ago. And we made a request for $38.5 million in bonds. Our voters said yes to all of these. A capital override authorization of $2 million annually for 7 years. And then an M&O override authorization, which has a 7-year life. We request 13.3% beyond our budget. We to add 13.3% to what the state has set as a limit for our budget. However, in the M&O override, it has a 7-year life, but in the 6th year, 1/3 of it phases out. So there's 2/3 left of the original authorization. And the 7th year, another 1/3 drops off. So we always go back to the voters in the 5th year. So back to your question, Gina, 2 years from now, there will need to be another election to try and avoid a phase out.
And will that just be for the M&O side, or, and then
Well, you know-
bonds would be 2 years later, or how is that handled?
It depends on the assessed valuation and what the bond underwriters can come up with. And you're going to have a presentation, I'm sure, pretty soon. It usually happens in February from the bond underwriters about what, based on our assessed valuation, they think that we could generate for this next issuance, which will be sold in May. We have, and board members who've been at this for a while, remember, we always make sure the tax rate doesn't increase. And that is part of the promotion to the election. So for bonds, 66 cents is the tax rate threshold that we don't want to exceed. So the bond underwriters will work with you and tell you what 66 cents will do. Now when I did all the presentations on the bonds, I had predicted we'd have 4 issuances every 2 years, so over an 8-year period. But in our first issuance 2 years ago, we sold more than we ever imagined. It was 14.5 million, I think. So I predict now, based on that, unless things go south, that we might have 3 issuances. So another 4 years. So the next election in 2 years, you won't go back for a bond because we'll still be spending bond money. Well, you can, but it would have to be if the tax rate is down below 66 cents and there's some way to bridge the gap to get it back to 66 and still generate more funds or bonds. We put the capital override on the last 2 elections with the M&O before it ran out of time.
Right?
And that was to avoid the cost of 2 elections.
Cost and the effort.
And then voter fatigue, having to go back to an election 2 years later now for the capital override. So I don't know what you're going to do, but it seems to still make sense in 2 years to go for both overrides.
When you say 2 years, are you talking the 2026 election or 2027?
27.
That's an
In
off
between.
year. That's,
An off year.
yeah. That's interesting.
This is 25 and it's a third.
Trying to do the math in my head.
So it would be November of 27.
And just to be clear on words and phrases that we sometimes use, we also refer to the DAA override. And that is the maintenance and operations override. That's capital.
That would be, yeah.
Yeah, DAA is capital. But
Which is district additional assistance.
I don't remember from the election or from the ballot
Is that ballot
pamphlet
language?
whether we put district additional assistance as well. We might
I
have,
think,
it probably was noted. It's the same, but it's not M&O.
Today I'm also learning, because I did not know that the school district pays for the
yes.
election.
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so when you get to the straw budget, which I'm going to get into and kind of in the weeds for that, there's an election line item this year, because you had an election, obviously. And then it'll drop off as part of the proposal for next year's budget, because there won't be an election. So it comes every 2 years. It comes every 2 years. And I've forgotten exactly what it costs, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 30-some thousand.
I'm gonna say like
37,000.
34,000.
37.
Also, if there are no contested school board elections.
Correct.
You don't have to hold the elections.
And we say,
Or you save that money.
We've had many that were not. you're not necessarily the lucky ones, but
40 grand.
$40,000.
Where does that money come from to pay for the
It
election?
comes from M&O.
yeah, we budget it in the M&O straw budget when you're getting into the detail.
It's my huge takeaway from today.
So far.
Yes, so far.
There's no such thing as free elections.
No,
Yeah.
I naively thought that
Yeah.
somewhere, somehow in the government, someone paid for all of our elections, but I guess not.
So back in '22, there was also a school board election, obviously, in even numbers. So that, the cost of that election was these three questions and the governing board election, so the cost was
Amy and Regina.
more.
Yep.
And we work with the county superintendent's office for the elections. It's a fairly substantial planning effort.
Is it too much in the weeds to discuss how the tax rate is set? I mean, I know it's weedy.
We need so much money for M&O, based on ADM. I'll get into how we figure ADM. And we have to generate money for that 13.3% override, which, by the way, is not affected by ADM. So the number that goes into the budget in the spring for the 13.3% is constant. It never changes for
And
the
that, so
year.
it's from whatever it existed as when we voted for it. I'm misunderstanding.
It's based on ADM, but it's not affected by the fluctuation over the first 100 days of ADM or something.
Oh, okay.
It isn't part of a budget revision because it doesn't change
All right.
as far as the
I didn't know
number.
that.
And then the bonds are in there, you know. So it's everything that voters have approved, the 2 million, the 13.3%, which is about 4.5 million this year, and all of that.
And that's work that gets done in the county superintendent's office.
Yes. And interacts with Lisa Tatel and Denise Bartlett until we get it to a place where we send it to actually Stiefel
Right.
and the bond underwriters to have them check the numbers so that there are several sets of eyes.
Mistakes.
Hmm?
There have been mistakes.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't want to talk about that. Not ours.
No, not ours.
Wasn't our
Okay.
mistake.
I remember the apology letter that we received from the,
It's interesting that Stiefel didn't catch it, you know, but whatever. Water under the bridge.
Okay, now I have to say something about it.
okay.
There was a time a few years ago, and it always has to do with a change in the CFO, you know, coming in, a new position, a new person. He calculated our tax rate not on the basis of a K-12 unified school district, but a separate allocation for an elementary and for a union high school district. And anyway, and then there was the other time where they didn't put in our 2 million, oh, no, they put in 200,000 instead of 2 million for our capital override. And that was the biggest brouhaha.
Yeah, they missed a zero.
And the county picked up the 1.8 through the tax base, unfortunately. The 1.8 million through the tax base, so there was a letter that went out to all taxpayers about why you're paying for 1 year more.
Yes.
So, okay, those were moments.
Yeah.
Our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th, you know that. This is the fiscal year 2024-2025, abbreviated to fiscal year 25. It's always that second year's reference. There's a statutory timeline for districts to propose and adopt an annual expenditure budget. This is it. On or before July 5th, you have a public hearing on a proposed budget. On or before July 15th, you adopt a budget and we submit it to the Arizona Department of Education. If the state forms don't get to us in a timely fashion, there may be a budget revision that's coming after July 15th, on or before September 15th, to take care of that. That doesn't require a public hearing. December 15th, there might be a possible budget revision, and also May 15th.
Based on
Changes,
actuals. Okay.
yeah, changes to the budget. We have had every year a May budget revision. That is just something that happens all the time. We have had some years where we've had both December and May. And then we've had some years where we have that off after the July date budget revision.
We will be looking at a budget revision coming up in either February or March this year, because we did not do one in December. Because we didn't receive the additional allocations in time to do a budget revision in December, so we were waiting. But we will be bringing a budget revision probably in
And I suspect it has to do with making sure everything's in order before we
Correct.
sell the bond issuance.
We want to make
Because
sure
we
that,
we sit down with the Standard & Poor's folks who are going to do the bond rating. That is after we have gone through all the documents with the bond underwriters and some other folks listening in. So, you know, you want an A+ rating if you can get it.
we want to make sure that all of the DAA that we transferred to M&O and then that we don't need an M&O gets transferred back.
Which addresses the audit issue from the
Correct.
other day, right?
Correct, which is
Right, and they're going to look at the cash on hand and so forth. So it gets fairly meticulous.
Yes.
So the revision you're talking about is for fiscal '25.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we're also under these deadlines for fiscal '26.
Correct.
Yeah, these are standard for every fiscal year, Tom. There are many expenditure budget categories. I haven't listed, even come close to listing all of them. You know, we're a heavily regulated institution, and the accounting system is incredible. As far as, I don't know how many account codes there are, thousands maybe, but it's really very different from corporate America, where you've got a chunk and you decide how to spend it instead of all of these account codes and requirements to put certain expenditures in certain areas. It's quite an undertaking. And then an external audit every year. I've often said in the past that, and we've had clean audits, as you know, for years. I've often said, you know, if we didn't have to have an annual external audit, we could probably reduce the staffing in the business office by 2 people. Not that that's great, but it just takes an enormous preparation for our auditors, et cetera.
When you say external audit, you mean not the auditor general?
No,
The one
Heinfeld
that we
Private
get,
Meach.
audit,
like
accounting
balance.
firm, yeah.
Heinfeld Meach has most of the audit business for school
Was
districts.
there ever a time in the state, people who had clean audits year after year after year got a break from having the annual audit requirement?
Yes, there was one occasion, I think it was a law, where we could take a pass for a year,
Just 1 year,
2 years, you know, and then it went away.
yeah.
It changed.
I can kind of understand the desire to have an annual audit. I mean, we're fortunate to have a lot of consistency in the people who are overseeing and a lot of knowledge of people, in the people who are overseeing, but there are probably school districts that don't function that way, and there
Oh,
could
I don't
be a big-
disagree. I don't disagree. But, you know, you've got a proven track record in a given school district, and audits are constant. I mean, one ends, and basically you have a little tiny breather, and the next one starts. It's a constant process.
Yeah, the external audit team is in the district in the fall and back again in the spring.
Yep.
Spent hours,
Yep.
Days.
yeah, days, hours over days, right. So there are many expenditure budget categories, and I've just chosen to focus on the 3 that you are going to be dealing with as a board and starting in April, probably. So we'll discuss those 3: maintenance and operations, classroom site fund, instructional improvement fund. Examples of other budget categories are federal and state grants like special education and title grants that support struggling students, homeless children, foster children in foster care. And those are federal dollars that flow through the state to the Arizona Department of Ed, and then they distribute those dollars. Food services, another fund. Civic Center, which is the place we put revenue for facility rentals. And in our district, facility rentals, it's Sunrise Drive that has the most money going into a Civic Center fund because they have been renting their facility for years to a church on Sunday. And then maybe the high school is the other one, but otherwise, most of the other schools have no Civic Center funds. Pays for paper towels and replenishing supplies that are used by the rentor. Pays for staff during that facility time because we always have somebody there from the district who is working with them and overseeing the facility rental. Tax credits, student activities is a big one.
Are the Civic Center funds, you mentioned what they go to compensate for, the staff, et cetera, but is that regulated in some way that says you can only charge up to X amount and it has to offset certain things, or?
You have a governing board policy for the fee schedule.
Got it.
Different categories of rentors. And I don't know if you'll see some revised schedule in May. If there's no revision, it doesn't come to you, but it is in your policy manual.
But that is something under our purview, not dictated.
No, you're correct. The only thing that's statutorily required is that we cannot use school district funds to pay for anybody's rental. In other words, reduce the cost. It has to be the actual cost of operating that school space that they want to rent and providing the staffing and so forth. In other words, we're not going to.
Utilities, custodial,
Yep.
all of those are.
We're not going to contribute
We
to.
can't subsidize.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we don't distinguish among the type of organization that's renting the facility. It could be a religious organization, it could be a civic organization, right?
There's access to almost anybody unless their philosophy as an organization is incredibly counter to ours, as an educational institution. But there's a fee differentiation.
Right.
If you're a commercial business,
Sure.
you're going to pay more. If you are the FFO,
Right.
nothing. So there's
So
a,
they're exempt there from having to cover the utility cost, but, because we were just saying we can't subsidize any of these groups, but because the FFO is a school-sponsored or a district-sponsored group, it's not considered a subsidy
correct.
to let them use the facilities for free.
Yes, they are us and we are them.
Right, okay.
What about like the Tucson Symphony Orchestra when they hold concerts in our high school?
They rent the music hall.
They wouldn't have like the business rate, they would
No.
have,
There's like a
It's a
nonprofit.
Yeah,
there's a
nonprofit rate,
nonprofit rate, all the way up to, I've forgotten how many categories,
I think
but
there's
all the
like
way
a
up to
kids
commercial.
organization rate, Boy
right,
Scouts,
like
that
the,
kind of thing, and then there's
if it's a
nonprofit.
kids organization, it's
Yeah,
less,
and then
and, yeah.
nonprofit, and then corporate, right, if I remember
I think that's
correctly.
right,
Like RHOA rents Manzanita facilities and pays the corporate rate.
Right.
Because
Oh,
we
wow.
sort of like come under that umbrella, so to speak, so.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Ours
mean-
is renting Orange Grove for the same.
And
The
actually,
HOA is?
actually,
Oh, that's funny.
ironically, it's less expensive to rent La Encantada, sorry.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's funny.
Wow.
I know, right? But I think the joking is not, that wasn't a joke, that was serious, but if you're sort of like noodling around the idea of like, could this be a revenue stream? I don't know that that's where I want to go. I think potentially it's more about this is how we engage with our community. This is why these spaces are valuable, so to speak, as a community resource, in the same way that neighborhood kids can play in the Manzanita Park
Playground.
playground,
yeah.
thank you, on the weekends when kids aren't, you know, or when school and care is not in session, it's a resource for the community.
Yeah,
So I think that's
the
where the value is.
It's the Parks and Rec of the foothills,
Sure.
Exactly.
our campuses.
'Cause we don't have
However,
Parks
back
and
to
Rec
the
otherwise.
law requires, in the case of facility rental, that we don't subsidize.
Well, otherwise it would be gifted public funds.
Exactly. But I mean, like, even just having the space available, even though you have to pay a
Pay for
fee,
it,
it's still
right.
part of like, this is a community resource, you know? And even if it were like a town hall or something, quite often or a civic center, quite often you have to pay a fee to use that space, so.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure,
see it in a
we
very
do this through
similar-
community schools. They handle our rentals.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they have many stories to tell, and I'm familiar with many of these where taxpayers, because they live in the district, feel like they should be at the lower
Yes.
rung of the fee schedule, even though they're there to whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
I'm sure it's challenging at times, but these facilities were paid for by the community. Okay, let's talk about maintenance and operations. It's where the day-to-day expenditures of the district rest. So, employee compensation, which would mean salaries, wages, and benefits, supplies, custodial services, utilities, maintenance and repair, transportation, and when we get into talking about the straw budget, there are many other categories of very specific expenditures that fall under maintenance and operations. And where does the money come from to pay for M&O? The preponderance of it is ADM, which is enrollment. And I will get into some specifics. It's pretty interesting how ADM works in a minute or two. So enrollment of students is really the largest base for revenue. We talked about Prop 123 already. It brings in, this year it's going to be about $350,000. They're distributing 75 million of that 3.5 billion, you know, that has a 10-year life, and this is the end of it. 75 million this year, and our portion is 350,000. We receive transportation funding each year based on the average daily route miles per eligible student transported. Eligible students in elementary grades, and remember in Arizona, elementary is K-8. Middle schools are considered elementary. The eligible students are those whose residences are greater than 1 mile from their school. And for high school, grades 9 through 12, greater than 1.5 miles. Their residence is greater than 1.5 miles from the school. This year and most every year recently, we receive a little over $1 million in revenue. This year it's $1,162,000, and it's Eileen who every year points out when we have budget planning that we spend almost double that to run our system. So the transportation revenue does not come close to paying for our system.
And there's been no increase in the formula in any way to account for changes in gas prices or
No.
anything? It's just the
It is.
same dollar amount?
Yeah, we have been putting the same exact dollar amount in the straw budget for several
single
years.
Years?
Yeah.
Does taking open enrollment students, you know how we go to like meeting points or whatever to pick up open enrollment students, does that factor into our transportation
Yeah.
allowance?
My recollection is most years we have Amy runs that. She's the one who puts out the application and manages.
Used to.
Oh, well, somebody does, sorry. Anyway, I think it's usually about 400 students, open enrollment students who access our bus system, come to some of our stops.
And then they're ineligible.
Oh, yes,
Does
they're,
that help increase our funding, our transportation funding?
no, they fill up a bus, or they help fill up a bus because we've got room. But
But we don't get funding.
We
for
don't
we
it.
don't get funding for them?
okay, these people are saying no. We know it's going to be more than 1 mile. Well, it isn't necessarily
But they're not in our
the bus
catchment
stop,
area.
but their residence is more than a
Right.
mile,
Again, it's a community service.
or a mile and a
Well,
half.
it fills the bus.
And it helps
Exactly.
It cuts down on traffic. I mean,
Yes,
I
it's
understand why
correct.
we do it. I
Correct.
just was hopeful that it would also
Yes.
increase our budget allocation.
And we do have people in the community who, you know, the bus goes by, they count
Yes.
heads.
How many kids are riding that bus?
And, you know, there are dollars at work, so we want to make sure
Yes.
I loved that about this district when I was open enrolling. the
that you
fact
could access the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and none of our campuses were built for this kind of vehicular traffic,
No.
right?
Not at all.
So if you can avoid it,
And it's just good for kids to ride the bus.
Yes.
It is.
yeah, the younger they are, the more they love it.
All those like
Right.
life skills that you learn.
Okay, our 13.3% override generates about 4.5 million. Let me give you a little background. In Arizona, you can tax up to 15%. And ours is 13.3%. Why? Well, years ago, there were two separate overrides, one for K-12, which was 10%, and you could go up to 5% for something called a special program override. Our special program override was 3.3% to cover the cost of whatever programs at the time. I don't remember what they were. And when the state collapsed these two and just made it one M&O override that you could tax up to 15% or supplement the budget by 15%, we stuck with the 13.3%, so the tax rate didn't go up. In other words, renew, maintain, no tax increase. That's
We
why,
do have that conversation every year, whether we should go for the 15%.
and you'll probably talk about it in 2 years,
Yeah.
whether you want to move to 15% instead of staying at 13.3. There are funds to provide K-3 reading intervention. Denise over time has been the person, I don't know, that may not be the case anymore, to oversee our K-3 reading intervention, Move On When Reading. And the amount that we have this year is a little over 217,000 for that.
That's on a per student, K-3. K-3 per student. We just get a flat rate for per student in our K-3.
It's for kindergarten through third
So
graders.
side to it, enrollment in those.
Yes.
Okay.
And is that flat rate per, forgive me for using the word body, or is it ADM? Because kindergartners are only half a kid.
I think it's half for
It's
kindergarten.
half a kid.
I'm definitely gonna love that portion of the meeting today. We talk about portions of kids, percentages,
You're right.
We just do half their brain.
top half, bottom half.
Yeah.
There's a carry forward amount, and we've always carried forward at least 4%. This year, I think it's going to be more, from what Denise has told me.
Which will
And
come
this
in
is
the,
just money that was budgeted for that didn't get spent.
Right, so the 4% this year is a $1.3 million amount. But that budget revision she mentioned, I think, is going to include a larger budget, carry forward amounts. And then finally, capital dollars transferred.
also, we had more ADM as well.
Yeah, the ADM went up,
So
didn't
the
it?
ADM went up, which is why we have a higher carry
Okay.
forward as well.
It was a good reason.
Yes.
By law, and this wasn't always the case, but over the last several years, we can move capital money, which is district additional assistance, to the M&O side, or move M&O to district additional assistance. I don't recall moving M&O. And we have several times, but not every year, moved DAA funding. And in large part, we can do this because we have bonds for capital.
And
You
override.
know, the generosity of our community, our voters, makes it possible to really look at DAA transfers, particularly when we're trying to come up with a number for an increase for salaries, wages, benefits. That's typically,
DAA's pretty much become our balancing figure.
it is.
When we're doing our straw budget, that's the number that's gonna change every time we see an iteration of the straw budget, because things changed in the rest of the expense categories, and we either need to grab more money from DAA or put more money back into
Right.
DAA. So when we start going through those, every meeting iterations of the straw budget, you're gonna see that DAA
Transfer.
yeah,
It's
the
called the
transfer from
transfer.
DAA is where we're balancing the budget.
Mary, do you know about what percent or how much of the M&O budget
70%,
Accounts for people?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
salaries, benefits?
Yeah, I computed it yesterday, I think. It's usually been around 75%. I'll get into the weeds on classroom site fund where we're spending a lot of money in salaries and wages that supplements M&O. So that portion or that percentage of the M&O budget that goes to personnel fluctuates a bit, but I think it's always been pretty steady around middle 70%. Okay, and Denise told me the DA transfer, which she may have already told you, is going to probably be $300,000 to $400,000 this year, whereas the straw budget shows $1.8 million. You know, so things change obviously from budgeted to actual.
So this is kind of a weedy question too, but so we budgeted for $1.8 million.
Yes.
You
Yep.
think it's gonna be 300 to 400 instead? So is that what makes up part of the carryover?
Yeah, the carry forward is
Carry forward,
higher,
Yeah.
so we don't have to transfer as much.
But it doesn't get put in carry forward.
Okay, I
Right.
got
I
it.
mean,
No.
it's going back into, so to speak,
Goes back into the
reverse
capital.
Yes, it
transfer.
goes back. Because you're only allowed to transfer 1 year's allocation for DAA. You can't transfer unlimited funds. You can
Right,
only do
that's-
1 year's allocation,
About 3 million, right?
about 3.
Let's talk about ADM and how that works. This is the language from the statute. Average daily membership means the total enrollment of fractional students and full-time students minus withdrawals of each school day through the first 100 days. Now, I don't know why we have some sort of tradition in some schools to celebrate the 100th day, because there's still 80 more days, and it's the cumulative ADM number over the first 100 days.
Not just on that 100th.
No,
Oh.
but okay, you
So
know,
like individual absences
Any
during those
reason-
first 100
any
days
reason-
affects our ADM.
any reason to have a party. No,
Crazy?
Like,
That's not why they have a
excused
party.
or unexcused?
Yeah, if the kid's seat
kid's
is
sick.
not, behind
no,
is
it's not
in the seat,
attendance,
It's not.
it's actual enrollment, it's not
Oh, I
attendance.
thought it was attendance.
I thought it was attendance. I thought I was trained in one of these sessions that it was
You know,
attendance affected
what,
it.
there was a time years ago, and you've been around a while,
That's true.
where if there was chronic absenteeism, the attendance rate was pretty dismal. It did affect, and I don't even remember how, because it was never an issue for us, ADM. But no, this is enrollment, actually enrolled in the school.
Because I remember
Yes.
education initiatives at the FFO level. If you're going to have doctor's appointments for your kids, don't take them out of school because it affects our funding.
Yeah, that's
Believe it or
not
not.
true, but whatever works to get
Whatever
them.
works. Well, it's good to know that that's
But
not
chronic
the case.
absenteeism is still a category
Yes, yes.
in attendance, and of course, it's an issue
Yes.
if kids are gone that much.
So basically, this captures students who maybe enrolled in our school and South Point and decided to go to South Point and never unenrolled from us, or students who enrolled here and ended up moving over the summer and never unenrolled from us. It captures
Well, we
those sorts of
withdraw them.
movements. Is that the kind of stuff?
Yeah, those are some examples. Let me give you some here.
They move in the middle of the year.
First of all, for maintenance and operations, the base support level this year that the state has set is $5,013 per full-time, keep in mind, full-time student before waiting. And I'm going to show you that no student brings in only $5,013. That's the starting point. So you take the base support level. There are a couple of weighted categories of students. One's called Group A weight, and then there's a Group B weight, which I'll mention in a minute. But Group A weighted students are all students in K-12 and pre-kindergarten students with disabilities. The state does not fund our Valley View Early Learning Center except for the children who have disabilities, so special education. So you take the $5,013 as a base support, and you can see here I've given you the weight. Preschool 1.450, that shows you what an individual full-time child would generate. K-8 grades 1.158, and there's the number per child. And high school, considered probably more expensive to deliver those programs, the weighting is 1.268. And then we have Group B weights. There are many more categories in this area for students with special needs, so I've given you kind of a range from very small weight up to larger weights. So gifted, a tiny bit more.
Are these additive, Mary?
Pardon me?
Are these additive, meaning that you can have it's a Group A weight plus a Group B
Oh,
weight?
yes,
or
all,
does the-
all of these kids are going to be a Group A
Right, okay.
as
So-
well. Yes, exactly, I see what you're saying. Right, so this is just for the Group B weight, the amount that's generated, but then you would add, if they're full-time student and in elementary, you know, that other weighting, right? So free and reduced kids, a little more money, English language learners, mild intellectual disability, preschool severe delayed, hearing impairment, visual impairment, just as examples. There are probably another 7, 8 categories that I haven't put in here.
Can I revisit something you said a moment ago that I think I heard right? The state does not fund our early learning center?
We receive
Except
no
for-
state funds, like $5,013 per student.
Right.
For early, it's a tuition-based program entirely,
Okay.
except for children with disabilities who have specific programs.
So, meaning, so the state doesn't fund any preschool
Correct.
whatsoever. So, for example, Jake, at 3 years old, had a speech impediment. I took him to Valley View, where he worked with Beth Simonsky, who's still
Yes,
there,
she is.
providing speech services. So the district was reimbursed for him to receive services at Valley.
And you didn't pay tuition
And I didn't
for
pay
those
tuition.
services.
Right. I paid
But for the
nothing.
Gen Ed program,
Right.
They all pay
They have to
tuition.
pay tuition.
then it's a tuition-based program.
And that tuition-based program, is it required that it offset the costs of operating it, or is that an area where there's
the goal.
discretion? That's sure.
Yeah, but we
Sure,
set the tuition. There's
Yeah.
no state
So
requirement.
there's no, okay, good. Not dictated by anyone else. Okay, just making, understand.
During the pandemic, we underwrote through M&L, the district, $4 million for community schools as a whole. Now, any tuition-based program in our district, it comes under the guise of community schools. So it was a difficult time, wasn't it?
Yeah. We managed to keep everything open, so.
That's
it's like
true.
We had a preschool program coming out of COVID still.
Yeah.
They've recovered well.
They have.
Yeah,
Schools
they
have
really
recovered well.
have.
Yes.
They're doing really well.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Hiring back.
Here are some ADM examples that I've put together. A student enrolls the first day of the year, of those first 100 days, has enrolled the first day, it's a 1.0 full-time equivalent.
And
Full-time,
you're still enrolled on the 100.
full student. Well, yes, the assumption is they're the whole.
Okay.
Okay,
got it.
this is, yes, in that 100, you're right, in that 100 days. Student shows up, enrolls on the 21st day, has missed the first 20% of the year, or those 100 days, and it's a 0.8. Student enrolls on the 61st day, 0.4. Student shows up on the 100th day, 0.01. Ah, but if it's a kindergarten child,
It's point
take,
zero zero
take
five.
0.5 times all those. So first day, 0.5. 21st day, 0.4. 61st day, 0.2. And the 100th day,
we sure lose money on those
0.005.
Is this formula a national formula or a state formula?
Oh, I think it's probably state-specific, but I don't know about the rest of the world.
And no funding for anybody who enrolls afterwards.
Correct?
But we're still
We're educating
educating
them.
them for
80 days.
almost half a year.
And if they live in districts, we have to take them. So,
Well, yeah, yeah.
There are all kinds of stories, true or not, about other schools. Once the 100th day has occurred, no problem moving kids out.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Because it doesn't affect their budget.
But I would assume if someone comes to us on day 120, an open enrollment student, do we accept that student?
Yes.
I would think we would, because we would want to keep them for future years.
Well, we have
But I'm
to
just
if
wondering
there's
what our-
capacity.
Yeah, open
Oh, that's
enrollment,
true.
the open enrollment
can't-
program, if we have
capacity, we have to take them, you're
Right,
right.
we must.
even though it doesn't affect the budget, so to speak, after the 100th day, we continually monitor ADM and update it. So the student database guy, manager Dan, you know, the schools are submitting their additions, deletions, and changes in enrollment, and then he interacts with the Department of Ed. But when you're budget planning for the next year, you want to use the ADM at the end of the year.
Right.
Just like we use the staffing expense for that year, knowing that it'll change budgeted to actuals, but it needs to be as close to real as possible.
And that also explains why you have Kinder Plus, right? So it's fee-based to cover the other half the year. And some board members have been very interested in funding full-day kindergarten as a district priority.
Yeah, and every time it's come up, we've said we just can't afford it.
would you be
Hugely
funding a
expensive.
full day?
Meaning,
Pay for,
Meaning we wouldn't
Pay for
charge
the other
tuition
half
for
of
the
the
second half of the
Oh,
day.
right, that we would, sorry, I
Yeah,
missed,
that we would
that we would fund it,
we
I'm
could
sorry.
budget that.
so it's
Right,
double the
gotcha.
personnel expense,
Gotcha.
you know, of the half day.
I don't know why I was so slow on that one, sorry.
That's okay. We all know how valuable it is to have
Yes, well, it
full-
keeps them in,
full-day kindergarten.
yeah, it
and
keeps them in districts.
Yeah.
So we'll
That's
get
why I
into,
didn't open enroll for kindergarten.
sure.
I would have had to pay.
So we'll get into the weeds because this is the straw budget tool that you use for planning. So for many years now, we've used it to try and identify, well, we do identify where every dollar is spent. The state form to which all of these numbers get translated eventually is a macro view and really not useful for planning.
So Tom and Jacqueline, you'll start, or we all, but you'll start to get delivered to your home typically by a courier, a budget pack, the straw budget, basically. And so it's printed on, legal size paper. It's not this size, it's legible, et cetera. So don't worry about reading it here. But to Mary's point, it's a version then that is much more user-friendly for us rather than, and then Lisa does the translation, so to speak, onto the formal system. And this is a tool then that we use, though, to go through budget setting exercise as a board.
Yep, so this first page is all about personnel, and we itemize certified, classified, special ed, administration, benefits, contributions to, Social Security, workers' comp. We drill down to the costs for people. And we always take the current staffing. So for example, when you in April start do your budget planning, it will show the budgeted from last year, which was the staffing from last year, fiscal year 24, reconciled, which is what's been going on for months back at MAC, to actuals. Because there are, it's not going to be the same teachers that were here, all the same teachers that were here last year, this year, classified, et cetera. So they reconcile those costs, and then those become the baseline. Those numbers become the baseline for fiscal year 26 budget proposal.
So a teacher goes out, leaves us, who is on step 15 of the salary schedule, and we hire someone at step 7. That differential, we capture.
And I mentioned earlier, 70% of the budget's like on this first page. And in April, you commit at that first meeting when you're seeing the straw budget and the administrative budget proposal that Denise will bring to you, you are asked to approve certified salary schedule, benefits. So you commit basically to those 70%, well, the classified comes a little later, June, but you commit to a substantial amount of the budget before you even are planning,
Right.
because it happens at that time. We have never offered contracts without a new number.
Which is not
Other
across other districts.
And this year, the laws
Sign a
change, and they have to
contract.
wait till what, March?
And then
March
they say how much your
15th.
salary
March
will be.
15th.
So no one can offer contracts now before March 15th. So Vail used to
That is good.
do it in January, and
Right.
then Tancaverdi followed, and I think we and Amphitheater were the only 2 districts that waited,
So that we could put a number in it.
that we can put a number.
So when teachers in those districts got a contract in January with the same number and they committed to it, they're obviously not going to show up at our job fair in February. So this kind of evens the playing field as far as competition for
Well, that's helpful.
teachers. Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, we're
now and
thrilled with
then.
that.
Flabbergasted.
I'm thrilled with that one.
That is positive.
Yeah, all right. Way to go, ASPA, probably, advocating for it.
So here are some other examples. I've taken each of the 5 pages of the straw budget to show you what's here. Other itemized expenses are utilities, which are water, sewer, gas, electricity, insurances, such as property and liability, and life insurance. We pay for staff life insurance policies. It's a benefit of employment here. Election services, which we have just talked about. So on this straw budget, it'll show the current year with the 37,000, as Denise said, for the election this year, and it'll be a 0 over in the right column for the proposed budget for the next year. Legal costs, audit services, district department budgets, like you have a budget, by the way, governing board, superintendents, that would be Mindy and Denise, curriculum, K-3 reading, community relations, business office, district supplemental funding to the high school athletics. And then there's contingency, and it is by design very conservative. It's less than 1% of the budget. It's $400,000. And no monies from contingency are authorized for expenditure without the approval of the superintendent. And we do this because we're confident from years that we have accounted for all the dollars. So it really has to be an unanticipated expense. I mean, we're not perfect. There are some things that pop up that we didn't anticipate. Nobody can overspend their budget, be it a school, a department. I mean, obviously the accounting system makes note if we're pushing the envelope on that, or there's been there's a proposed expenditure that would take it over. Denise would have to scrutinize why, if it is something that she would approve. It would have to be something that had to be purchased.
Yeah, and if a contingency purchase 1 year is expected to become a regular thing, then we put it into the budget.
Yeah.
It comes out of the contingency.
Can you tell me more about the athletics, the high school athletics? What does that do? What does that give the athletics?
Wow.
What deficiency are we making up for, I guess is a better question.
There was a time, and it was one of the uglier budget years, Carol will remember, where I proposed that we drop all support of high school athletics out of the district budget. It's because it was a really tight budget year, and we were spending we had an allocation in the budget of $400,000, which we didn't need because they had significant reserves, a lot of booster support, to keep these programs going. And ultimately, the board approved the recommendation, and we eliminated any supplemental funding for athletics for the high school. Well, over time, as we built budgets at the high school for the athletics program and have looked at tax credits, you know, revenue from gate receipts, the fees that are charged for participation, over time, we have added back in, and it's not much, what, 157,000? 100 what?
I think it's 154.
Yeah, 154,000, which is not much in a $42 million budget. And I think, from what I remember Lisa Tatel saying, we pretty much use it for coaches. Does that sound right?
Well, equipment, new uniforms.
We have budgets for athletics. At one point, 5 years of budget. Equipment, cycle purchases, et cetera. And based on our history of receipts, and you know, I suppose we can always crank up the fee for participation, but we don't prefer to. So adding 154,000 was a small contribution. But there were several years where there was nothing here.
And for context, that was during the 2008 plus major recession when school district funding was slashed and
We
have the money
we
in the
froze every employee's salary and wage for 3 years.
3 years, 4 years.
Right. Okay. Going on, we also have significant lines for software and hardware maintenance, so the whole technology area is in here. You know, for software subscriptions, hardware maintenance. The human resources budget includes such items as employee benefits, flexible spending, and COBRA administration. And then we have nursing services, AED, this is getting into the weeds, AED batteries and pads for all sites, mileage reimbursement. We have people who are, you know, assigned to more than one school. And when they travel, they keep track of their mileage and we reimburse. Moving on, maintenance. So Brian McNitt, whom you have met recently, you know, he has a budget for the maintenance department, but he has no capital money, by the way. And I remember Denise mentioning that he's like a teenager coming to her asking for money all the time. That's true. But it's a great way to keep track of expenditures for capital purposes. So this is M&O for maintenance. And this is an example, I think, where sometimes contingency, you know, towards the end of the year is supplementing the maintenance budget because you can't predict what's going to break down, the irrigation system, you know, or whatever. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
So for example, with the purchase of our new buses, we're going to remove some of that transportation because that's for repairs. Yeah, so with our new buses, we're going to be able to reduce that and
some
put
of
it
that money
elsewhere
back.
in the budget.
And you know, we outsource the operation of our transportation system. We own the fleet, and we employ 2 full-time mechanics to keep that fleet in good working order.
Learned our lesson from that last.
We moved to that after our last experience with outsourcing transportation.
Yes.
The driving services.
Yeah.
Yeah, the driving service. We learned the hard way.
Yeah, in our district, we outsource custodial, we outsource food service, we outsource transportation, and whatever. Custodial.
Substitute.
Oh, well, we use a ESI. So on this page, trash, recycling, custodial. Every school gets some M&O money, and it's based on their enrollment, and that's noted in the STRA budget as well. And we changed the numbers. The K-8 per student number is a little bit smaller than what the high school gets per student for their M&O budget.
We have our own AD now.
Yes.
Formula. We have our own ABM formula.
Well, yeah, we don't do fractional students, though.
Thank goodness.
We consider everybody full-time.
Whole bunch.
Special education, there's a small budget for special ed. Most of the special ed costs are in personnel, so on the first page. And then one of our most substantial federal grants is IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it is about $1 million. So you put all those together to underwrite special ed.
Is that $1 million, is that also is part of the M&O budget?
It's
or
a-
is
no,
that
it's a
on the
federal grant. It's a
side of
federal
things?
grant.
That's what
It's the
okay,
flow
so
of
it's not what's in here.
No, what's
No.
in here are the personnel costs for certified primarily and subs for certified. Then this budget, we have a membership in an agency that services students with visual and hearing disabilities. The transition from school to work high school program, there's some money in there. So this is not a large amount here, but you put that together with the grant, the federal grant, and the personnel costs that we underwrite, and it's several million.
Sorry.
Transportation, I already mentioned that, that's here. Current budgeted expense is a little bit north of $2 million. And then finally, we always note the administrative budget proposal for the budgeted year, and then zero it out and put in the new proposal. So you're going to, I'm pretty sure, the administrative budget proposal is going to focus on personnel. It usually does.
Yes, it will.
So moving on to the last two sections, Classroom Site Fund. This was a fund that was established back in 2002, fiscal year 2002, for 20 years. And then when it came around to it either dropping off or not, the legislature extended it for another 20 years. So we're in good shape till 2040, whatever. This is funded through the state sales tax, a portion of state sales tax, and also a portion of the state trust land. Here it comes again. And its uses, teacher-based salary increases, teacher performance pay, and then there are other areas that can be funded. Years ago, there was a requirement, it was called 20-40-40. The first 20% went to teacher-based pay. The next 40% was for performance pay, and the 40% left was for a menu, for menu items, and not as extensive as this menu list. We have spent this money year after year on teacher compensation, base pay, performance pay, and you will see on the spreadsheet, we track all of the years that we've tapped this because it's still part of the baseline. All of the years that we have tracked this to teacher compensation. So base pay, this is a $7 million revenue source. So the base pay is $2.7 million that we're spending. Performance pay, $1.4 million. Performance pay, by the way, is a one-time payment in June to teachers. And there's a performance pay plan that we follow for that. And then there's teacher compensation over the years of $1 million, almost $1.7 million. And then you add $1 million something in contingency and it gets us up to that $7 million amount. So this is, you think about $7 million being available for M&O to supplement employee costs. This is a really critical part of our budget to make salaries competitive. And then we have the Instructional Improvement Fund. The revenue for that comes from Indian gaming. I remember this, 23, 24, I think, was it Jamie Lee, what was her name, Hull?
Jane Hull.
Jane Hull was the governor, and I think she's the person who negotiated with the tribes.
They extended their contract.
Okay, you did, yeah. She negotiated with the tribes a certain portion of their revenue every year going to education, to K-12. So here we go, up to 50% for teacher compensation increases and class size reduction, and another use of the funds is dropout prevention programs, instructional improvement programs, including K-3 reading. The revenue for this is $758,000, almost $759,000. So we use this for people, but they do come under that category of dropout prevention and instructional improvement as far as the work that they do in the district. So staffing for the Nest and Emporium lab at the high school, math tutors at the 2 middle schools, additional counselors for elementary, middle, and high. We can't supplant funds. So if we're paying for any of these elsewhere in the budget, we can't do it here. But these are either new positions or new people to these positions.
Yes, except with the counselors.
Esther, I was just going to mention,
Okay.
you remember Esther funding, we made a commitment right up front that when ESSER funds, federal funds dropped off, we were going to still underwrite the 2 elementary counselors who were added. Now, I don't know about the 0.5 at Orange Grove.
Yes, the
0.5
is
at
now
Orange
And
added
Grove.
that's
in
being
there.
paid for out of here.
Yes.
Because the funds that originally supported them are gone, so it's not
Correct.
really considered supplanting.
No, it's
Correct.
the new. So,
You said new people in the positions? So if a new,
Well-
if a position that's paid for in M&O, a new person goes in, we can then pay for it here?
No.
No?
well,
We can't do
something
that?
happened with the high school special ed coordinator. How did we work that? Did she not work for a year and then
It
came back?
was funded through results-based funding.
Okay, so
Ah,
another funding
Another funding
source.
source went
Which was
away.
not M&O.
So not considered supplanting as long as it was,
Right.
right, good. And additional teachers of gifted students at elementary. So we now have a full-time gifted educator at each elementary versus 2 campuses sharing one. So that's how we spend instructional improvement funds. And that's all, folks. I noticed you didn't fall asleep, Tom.
You know, this is now one of my favorite and most fascinating subjects.
I was giving him a bad time.
Fun?
I was giving him a bad time because at the last board meeting, he commented at the orientation session in Phoenix that he wasn't too thrilled with the budget session he went to.
It was
believe I was
very, I mean, it
thrown
was
under the
going
bus.
into
It
the
wasn't.
different funds and the different
Yeah.
number of funds, and we don't need to know that part of it.
Okay, well, I told him he could just, stand up, walk around, get coffee, whatever keeps him awake.
So as someone who started voting in 1993?
Pardon me?
So as someone who started voting in 1993, this was like a greatest hits of everything that came before me as a voter. Oh, so that's what
Yes.
we did with that.
But there is so much more to this system that, would drive you crazy if you had to spend.
I can ask a question that is also, it is a weedy question, but when you were talking about the funding formula for certain types of students, and there's obviously a huge bump for students who are hearing impaired or visually impaired, and that reminded me that there are some instances where our school district pays tuition for our residents to go to school elsewhere. And I was thinking particularly students who go to the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind.
Yes.
Can you explain how that happens? Is it because we don't have the resources?
It depends on their need and it depends on their level of disability.
Oh, right. So if
So,
we cannot provide
Not all
services,
Most of our students are served, yes, at
Yes.
the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind, but not all over time I can think of.
Or they may start at that school and then transition back into our schools.
I see. But when
Depending on
when
their
we can't
needs.
provide services and they have to go to another place, I assume that place receives their funds.
Right.
Then we
Right.
also supplement those, or no?
We pay the tuition to that particular institution.
Okay.
And it's not just that school. On occasion, and it doesn't happen a lot,
Yeah.
we do pay for tuition for a student to be served student with a disability to be served somewhere else.
Okay.
Residential is rare, but day school locally happens. So,
And they're still considered our student. Yes. And we get the funding, which we then use
Oh,
to
I see.
pay the tuition. Is that the way it works?
they're
Because
still, they're
in
still
theory-
our student.
They're still our student because otherwise the public system wouldn't be funding them.
You got it.
Right, okay, got it.
So, we will post, Amy will post the slides in my notes
Oh, great.
on Board Book for you, if you have any reason.
Tom's gonna go
If you have
back
any
and
reason,
study it.
if you have any reason to reference them, they'll be there for you.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you all. I'm not going to hang around for the rest of the meeting.
Carol is.
We appreciate you being here very much, and, you know, just the ability to take such a complicated topic and to break it down into edible chunks is needed, not just for our new board members, but for all of us. We always learn something new. I don't think we'll ever have, well, I'll speak for myself, I don't think I'll ever really have a handle on it, but, so it's good to hear all the time. We really appreciate your time and expertise,
Yes, it was
Mary.
nice
And it's
seeing-
so good to see you.
Nice seeing you.
How does it feel being back in the room, Mary?
Good. You know, it was nice to see, I haven't been to any campus in 7 months, but it was nice to see the security upgrades
Yes.
here. I hadn't seen them. Obviously, the entrance and the fencing,
Right.
and I think we're done, are we, with all the security projects
We are, well,
over the
except
last?
Centegix
Strategics, yeah.
is installing this week.
Wow.
So as far as this study session goes, if our board members do not have any other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude the study session. We can, in a moment, end the video stream so that board members can have a short break before we can convene the regular meeting, at which time we will reactivate,
I think he just pauses it.
Just
I don't think he
pauses it.
turns it off.
He puts
Oh,
a,
okay.
be back soon.
yeah, be back soon. We will not be conducting any business in the next 15 minutes. Our regular meeting will convene at 6:30, per usual. Thank you so much.